Hi, I'm Ashley. Today I'm going to be showing you how to work into the foundation chain of your crochet project. So technically this is starting row 2 of the project, but your patterns will call it row 1 because this foundation chain does not count as an actual row in your project. So we're going to look at starting row 1. This is going to be broken down into 3 parts. We're going to talk about where you should actually insert your hook into the foundation chain, like through which part of the stitch or that chain stitch. The second part is going to be working kind of the basic crochet stitches and how far away from your hook you should actually be inserting your hook. So first, again, through which part of the chain, and then actually like how to count the chains and which chain you should insert the hook into. And then the third part is just some basic troubleshooting. So let's jump into this. But if you're not familiar with some of these terminology or like a chain stitch that I'm using, I do have additional resources on my channel. You can check out my crochet stitches and my crochet terminology playlists. They'll be linked in the description and on the end screen, so you can check those out for more information. Okay, so let's get into it. Here I have a foundation chain. I just went ahead and crocheted 11 chains. For everything, I'm just gonna stick with crochet or chain 11 as my foundation chain for this video. But let's first look at the anatomy of the chain stitch. So basically you have 3 strands to each stitch, or 3 loops. I'm gonna go ahead and take out my hook so that I can point with it. But you have the top loop, which is, if you look at this kind of V shape or arrow shape, this one is the top loop. And then you have the bottom loop, which is the bottom part of this V. And then if you flip it over, you can see a back loop, and that's kind of like a bump on the back. So there's the V on the front, flip it over, and you see a bump on the back, and that's the back loop. So always look for that V shape to figure out which loop you're doing. If you are finding this helpful already, or do find it helpful as we go, just go ahead and please like the video and subscribe, and that'll help out my channel too. So for working into the foundation chain, you can insert your hook through the top and the back stitch, okay? So this is the first option. So you would go in from the front, find that V, and put your hook through that top and then underneath that back. So if you look at it now, there's 2 strands on top of my hook and just 1 strand below my hook, okay? So that's the first option, is you insert your hook under the top and the back. And this is probably considered kind of the standard way to work into the foundation chain. There's not really a right or wrong way though, but this would be considered standard, okay? The next option is you can insert it just under the top loop. So instead of going above the bottom loop but through the other 2, you can insert it just under that top loop. I'm gonna take these back out so that it's a little bit easier to see. So when I look at this V, I'm going to just go under this top part of the V and do my stitch there. And so that gets you just 1 loop on top, 2 loops on bottom, and you can continue that way. Another option is to go through the top and bottom, which I don't know if anybody actually really does that much, but it is an option. So if you're gonna do that, you can find that V, okay, and go from the bottom and go underneath the bottom first and then the top. And so it still gets you 2 on the top, 1 on the back, or 1 on the bottom. And it's like you're going over the back loop in that situation. Again, I don't really know of anybody, I've never seen anybody do that, but it is an option. And if you find it easy to find that spot, or you just like the look of it, you can try that. And then the last option, and this is actually my go-to option just because I find it the easiest, is to go under just the back loop. So that last one, we kind of went over the back loop, but now we're gonna go under the back loop. So if I flip my chain over, then I can see all of those bumps on the back of my chain, and I'm just gonna go under the back loop. Okay, and I can work that way all the way across. The key to working into the foundation chain is not really which loop you work under. It's that you do the same thing the whole way across. Okay, so you can do any of them unless the pattern specifies differently, but you can really do any. Just make sure it's the same all the way across. So whatever you find easiest to be consistent. I find this one the easiest. That back ridge or back bump kind of is the easiest for me to find. So I do that. The other reason I like this one is because when I'm done, then the top and the bottom look very similar because I have the V is on the top there from those crochet stitches I just did single crochet. The V's on the top, and then if you flip it over, there's a V on the bottom because I just went under the back loop. I didn't go through the V. So I like kind of the symmetry that I get when I go through the back loop. But again, choose whichever one you like the best. It really doesn't matter. There's not a right way unless it is specified in the pattern, and then do it that way. So if you crochet and have already decided which loop you like to work in, let me know which one you like the best. Or if you are just learning and you're trying them out, let me know also which one you're finding is the easiest for you. So now that you know where to actually insert your hook in each individual chain, we have to learn how to count the chains and which chain, it's called which chain from the hook you're supposed to insert your hook into. And this will change depending on what stitch your row 1 of crochet is using. It may also change depending just on what the pattern states to do, but let's look at some of the basic stitches and where you will insert your hook. So let's figure out how to count these stitches. And I think this is one of the harder things. Whenever I was learning to crochet, I would chain the right amount, and then my first row, I would get the wrong number of stitches. And it had to be because I was working into the wrong stitch or working 2 into the same one or something like that. But I think working into the wrong stitch at the beginning or at the end is a very common mistake. So let's learn how to count our stitches. You can count them from the front and you look for those V's, okay? So I'm gonna start up here closest to my hook, okay? So this V right here that this strand is coming through is the first chain from my hook, okay? That one counts as the first one. So that's 1. Then we just go and find the next V. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And that last one, again, is a little bit harder. So the first one and the last one are harder. First one is the strand coming out. The last one is the one right next to your slip knot. So it's not as well defined, right? Like this one right here, you can clearly see the V. This one, the V's still there, but it's kind of bumping up against the slip knot. But that is still a chain. That's your last chain, basically. You can also count it from the back, which I already told you. The back is my favorite. So I turn it over, and again, the first one is a little bit harder to see. So this strand is coming out like on top of it, but this bump right here is the first chain from the hook, okay? And then you just count down, and then down here you have, this is the second to last, and then right here is the last one. Again, it's kind of bumping up against that slip knot, so don't miss that one when you get to the end. So if we are going to be crocheting, one of the basic crochet stitches. There's kind of some standards, and your pattern might specify differently. Do what the pattern says if it specifies differently. But typically what you do is for single crochet, you do your first stitch into the second chain from the hook. So again, looking at the back, I'm going to skip this first one that's right by my working yarn kind of tail, and I'm going to go into that second bump. Okay, so I crocheted 11, I chained 11, sorry, and I'm going to now single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in each chain across. So again, I'm just making sure that I'm staying in the same loop, working in the same loop as I was doing for that first one. So in this demonstration, that's the back loop. And I crochet across, and I should end up with 10 single crochets because I had 11 chains. I skipped one of them. So now I have 10 single crochets. So if you get here and you're like, man, that's only 9, it's because you're missing that last one that kind of blends in with the slip knot. Don't miss the last one. I cannot tell you how many times I did that. Okay, so that's your first option. Your second one, well, let me kind of just say though, in that option, the chain that you skipped does not count as a stitch. So when you come back into your next row, you just end at that single crochet. You don't work into that chain at all. So the second one is you're going to, do your chain, and then this is for half double. Instead of crocheting into the second chain from the hook, you're gonna do your half double crochet into the third chain from the hook, okay? So let me give that demonstration on the back real quick, and then I'll show through the V also where kind of standard working into the chain is. But again, this first one, hiding under the working tail, but that's one. So I'm gonna skip that one, and I'm gonna skip the second one, and I'm gonna work into the third chain from my hook for a half double crochet. Now on this one, it's different because those chains that you skipped, they will count as a stitch. So when you're working back, you're going to work into this right here, the top of this, because that's the chains that we skipped. Okay, so you're still going to end up with 10 stitches because this counts as a stitch. All right, now let me just show you that working through the Y or the V part also, but it's the same idea, right? So I'm going to skip this first one, which is where this loop is coming out, and I'm going to skip the next one and go into the third and do a half double crochet there. Okay, let me do one more just to kind of get a little bit more meat to it. And then when you look at it, you have 2 half double crochets, but these skipped chains count as a half double crochet. All right, now for a double crochet, you're going to skip 3. So you're going to work into the 4th chain. This is how you'll see it in the pattern. Working into the 4th chain from your hook, do a double crochet. Okay, so for this, I'm gonna we'll do through the front again. So I'm gonna do skip 1, 2, 3, and work into the 4th for a double crochet. And for this one also, those skipped chains counts as a stitch. Okay, so I still only have 11 chains. Now I skipped 3 of them, right? But that counts as a stitch. So this time I'm only going to end up with 9 double crochets because I didn't add another chain. So that brings us to, if you are making your own patterns, right? And you want 10 double crochets, you need to chain your 10 and then add 2 more. And that's how you're gonna get to the correct number. So chain however many you want your stitches to be, and then add 2 more for a double crochet. For a single or a half double, you're just gonna add 1. If you keep going up, right, so for a treble crochet, you're gonna add 3 chains and then work in the 5th chain from the hook. And that's so that your skipped chains that does count as a stitch is the same height as your stitches. So it has to be more chains, okay? So just know as your stitches get taller, you're gonna add more chains and then skip more chains for your first stitch, okay? So if I wanted to keep with 10 stitches, right, but I'm gonna do treble crochet, then I need to chain 13. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And then I'm gonna work into the 5th chain. So I'm skipping 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm gonna work into that next one and work a treble crochet. If you don't know how to do these stitches, again, I do have some playlists that show you very quick videos, 30 seconds to a minute, on how to do each of these stitches, including all of the basic, more advanced stitches. I talk about different terminology also, so if you need help with that, check out those. This is more just a video about how to work into the foundation chain. So as I'm working across, you can see that I'm staying in that back loop only and working my treble crochets all the way across. And when I get to the end, I'm going to make sure that I work into that final chain, which blends in with the slip knot. So just always be aware of that, okay? And then when you get here, you know, I could have been counting as I was going, but I wasn't because I was talking. But when you get here, you want to count and make sure you have the right number. So remember, these skipped chains do count as a stitch. So that's 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I got what I wanted, right? And once you get this down and have the right number, going forward is typically easier than that. So the rest of the rows kind of get a little bit easier. Starting the project is usually the hardest. Now, there are a few common problems that people have with their foundation chain, so let's look at a few of those. The first one is that the tension of the foundation chain is different than the tension of your stitches. And so most often I would say the foundation chain is too tight, and then you end up with this kind of arched project where the bottom is tight and then your stitches are looser, so it curves down. You could have the opposite problem where the foundation chain is too loose and then the stitches are tight, and then it would curve up, but that's not very common. So one easy way to address this that I've seen suggested a lot is actually just to use a different crochet hook for your foundation chain than you use for your actual project. So if the project calls for a size I 5.5 millimeter hook, you could, and you end up like this where it's too tight on the bottom, you could go up to a 6 millimeter hook, do your foundation chain, and then switch down to your 5.5, and that'll automatically make that bottom one looser. If you did have the opposite problem where your chain is loose, you could do the opposite and use a smaller hook for the foundation chain, larger hook for the project. You could also try to just adjust your tension on that first foundation chain row. It's a little bit hard, especially once you build habits, to change how you're doing it. So if you're finding that's not working, just use the 2-hook trick. So another problem that you could be having is just that it's really hard to see the different parts of your chain, or it's really hard to actually put your hook into that spot. And the reason for this usually is kind of related to the last one. Your tension is just, you're too tight, right? So again, you could use the trick of going up a hook size to make the chain looser to start with. If you do want to try to adjust your tension for the future, then what I like to think about is making sure I'm not kind of strangling the neck of my crochet hook. So I know when I started, I was not very good at keeping my tension consistent. So sometimes it'd be loose, sometimes it'd be tight. But when it's tight, it's because I would pull that stitch all the way up and then have to kind of like force my hook back through it to get it through, and kind of makes this scraping noise. Not sure if you can hear it, like a pop, but it's just too tight. And then when you try to work back into it, it's just almost impossible to get your hook through. So I really think, especially on my chain rows, I actually still consciously think to keep it looser. And the way that I do that is, again, preventing that strangling of the hook. So I make this little teardrop shape with my yarn. And then when I pull my next one up, I make sure that I have about the same size of a teardrop for each one. And I just keep my hands kind of loose, especially, well, both, but my hand on my hook is nice and loose so that I can flow easily. And I'm making sure that those are teardrop shaped and not just all the way a circle around the hook where there's no space at all. The next common problem is just getting the wrong number of stitches in row 1, right? And we kind of already talked about that with counting the stitches and making sure that you're going into the right one. So that's the most common problem, is just that you're not counting the number of stitches from your hook correctly, or you're missing that last stitch. You could also have counted your chains wrong. Definitely done that. When it's like chain 112, you know, you can easily lose count. So you could put like stitch markers every 10 so that you only have to count up to 10, and then you can kind of keep track that way. Or just, for me, it's turn off the TV while I'm doing my chain so that I could focus on counting. But there are different there are also like stitch counter things. I've never used one of those, but I know that they're there, and they're like, I think you can like put them on your thumb or something, but I've never used one, so I don't know. Another option would be putting 2 stitches into the same chain. And again, maybe until you get comfortable identifying the parts and the loops, you might put 1 stitch kind of through just the top loop, right? So I do one there, and then thinking that I still have to do this stitch because the back loop is not used, right? Then I go under the top loop and the back loop, and I just put 2 stitches in the same chain, even though it was through different parts of the chain. So making sure you're consistent on which loop you're going through will address that problem. And then again, missing the final stitch or starting in the wrong one. Those are kind of the ways that you could end up with the wrong number of stitches in your row 1. Another common kind of mistake or troubleshooting thing is that there's kind of, when you get done, the bottom edge just looks wonky. And there's a couple reasons that it can just look funky. One of the main ones is actually, especially when you get really long chains with 10, you're not really gonna have that problem. But if your chain is twisting while you're doing it, so right now I'm keeping that back loop up, but then if my chain like twisted here, right? And then I'm still working under the same loop, but there's like a weird twist in it, then your bottom edge is gonna end up looking kind of funky and bumpy or just wonky, right? You can see there's it almost looks like a knot right there where that twist happened. Again, this is not really a problem with small projects, but with, you know, an Afghan or something that has a really long chain, that can definitely happen. And keeping that chain straight and not twisted is important. Also, if you're working what's called in the round, that can happen a lot too, because you're actually then now, okay, I'm gonna come around and join this chain. This is kind of beyond this, but I'm going to join this part to the beginning over here. And if that chain, you know, right here, I just did it, and that chain, the bottom bump is out all the way around and not twisted. But if it kind of got twisted and then I went in and did the join here where I'm just kind of slip stitching, again, it's a little bit beyond it, but that's going to make your bottom edge of your kind of tube look funky because it's twisted. So make sure your chain's not twisted. All of that to say, make sure your chain's not twisted. Another one is just, again, making sure that you're consistent in which loop you're working under, because if sometimes you're working under one, sometimes you're working under two, then your bottom edge sometimes is going to have two loops below it, and sometimes we'll only have one loop below it, and that'll look a little bit funky. Another option that makes that bottom edge look funky is that you have, maybe it's not necessarily too tight, but you're not maintaining a consistent tension on your chains. So some of them are really loose, and then some are tight, and then some are kind of in between, and then you have another loose one, right? And then when you're working your stitches, you can see right there, like, it's so irregular that, you know, when you are going to do your next rows and complete your project, that bottom part's still going to look irregular like that. So try to maintain a consistent tension by looking at those teardrop shapes and making sure they're all about the same size. Doesn't have to be perfect, but, you know, generally you want those teardrops each time you pull up a loop to be approximately the same size. Okay, and then your chains will all look about the same. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. I really hope you learned something, and I hope that you enjoyed it. If you want more information, like I said, I'm linking these playlists with the crochet terminology, crochet stitches. That's harder to say than you would think, but check those out for more information. I have both basic and some more advanced techniques there. In those playlists, each video is short, 30 seconds to about a minute, and it just describes the term or this shows you how to do the stitch. So they're really good resources for those who may be a beginner or maybe a forgetter, because there are, you know, the basic stuff and then some more of the advanced stitches as well. So check it out if you're interested.